Happy Monday, everyone. Today I'm going to answer a question from the comments. This was a very generous comment that I got, but it also includes a really good question. So I'm just going to read the whole comment so you get the whole context of it. This is from Luke22022. I just found your channel and have watched a few of your videos. You are very intelligent and entertaining to watch and listen to. You have a gift and it is generous of you to share it with us. It concerns me a bit how animated you are when speaking of certain drugs. Do you ever think that the ankle bracelet is a bit like your wife was at one time, keeping you from the excitement of the drugs and experiences? Are you ever concerned that you will return to the opiates when the bracelet is removed? You have a lot to give to others. Thank you so much, Luke. That's a great comment. I really appreciate it, and a great question. That's what we're going to talk about today. But real quick, if you're brand new to these videos, I'm Brian. I was a trauma ICU RN, and then I stopped doing that to kind of become a full-time heroin and meth addict. I was arrested for selling drugs. I got sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. I'm serving out the rest of that sentence now on house arrest. This channel is just a way for me to share with you what I've learned after having lived an addicted life, and also talk about how I'm finding wellness and balance moving forward as I rebuild my life from scratch. So welcome. So I've talked about this a little bit in past videos, but I thought it was a good time today to touch on it again because I'm getting so close to maybe getting my ankle monitor off in about 90 days from now. It's definitely not certain. Last week on the videos, I told you guys that they were going to tell me in the next couple days here whether they were going to do it or not. That turns out to not be the case, actually. They are having my parole hearing in a day or two, but they won't tell me what they decided there until like a couple days before they're supposed to actually take the thing off. That's when they'll tell me whether they decided they're going to do it or not. There's like just no end to just the toying with you, it seems like, in this process, but whatever, I'm good with it. I've decided to just completely forget about it, and just as my good friend Irons says, who was my bunk mate in the prison camp I was in for many months, he had a lot of experience with the prison system, and he always used to say to me, Brian, I don't start believing that they're going to do anything until a week after they did it. And I'm starting to understand that, and I'm adopting that mentality now. My parole officer said I could like email her and maybe get an answer sooner. Whatever. My plan is to just completely forget about it and just dive deep into my day-to-day routine and not worry about anything else. It doesn't really matter ultimately what they're gonna do if I'm living well already day to day. That's kind of my whole MO that I've been adopting through this whole process and this process of finding lasting sobriety. And that sort of leads us into this question here. So the question again is essentially, how concerned am I that my involvement in the Department of Corrections and my prison sentence is one of the main pillars that is holding up my sobriety at this point. And that when that consequence is taken away, am I afraid that I'm going to just fall back into the opiate use? And Luke goes on to ask if maybe this is analogous to a previous time where I was with my ex-wife and I would have periods where I was doing better like for her, and I didn't want to relapse because I was afraid of the consequence of what would happen in our relationship. But then when she would leave, even if it was just for temporary periods of time, and I felt like I was alone and I could get away with it, I would go back to using. So in other words, is this all just maybe another circumstance of consequences, and because the consequences are there, I'm not using, and when the consequences are removed, perhaps I will start using again. I want to quickly just clarify my perspective on the circumstance with my ex-wife. I hate calling her my ex-wife because she's actually like a dear friend of mine now, but I don't want to like use her name, just out of respect. So I guess for now, ex-wife. It is true that in the past, in that relationship, there were periods where things would come to a head with my drug using. I was always trying to hide it. I would get found out, things would come to a head, and then I would have this push, this motivation to try to get myself off of it. Mostly it was me saying, I can do it on my own, I don't need help, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna make this better. And then there would be a period where I would be trying to get better, and then I would always kind of fall back. So I never really was fully successful in that circumstance. I think the longest that I was ever off of drugs before this time was a 6-month period, and the first 3 months of that 6-month period, I was in an inpatient rehab. Today, since I've been arrested, I've been off of drugs for coming up on 3 years now. When I think of these two scenarios, I feel like the consequences were all in place in the previous scenario with her. In fact, I would actually say that I feel like the consequences were worse in that situation because I had my whole life that I had built up. And the consequences of me using in that situation was that I would lose all of that. And that still didn't stop me ultimately. Even though those consequences were all there, it still didn't stop me from using again and again until I ultimately did lose all of that. For those of you who are new here and haven't been following this channel, just so you know, it was like about 1.5 years, I think, from when I lost everything and I stopped nursing and I just started running around and doing drugs and ultimately selling them until I got arrested. In the past, over the years, when I was with my wife, there were many times that I tried to get sober, and particularly the time when I went to rehab and I was sober for 6 months, I experienced this period of being very excited and certain of myself that I was never going to use drugs again, right? And when I look back on that now, I realize I was in what is called a pink cloud. I was just overly optimistic and felt like my problems were over, even though I hadn't really committed to doing any deeper work on myself, and ultimately I relapsed. Since I've been arrested, and it's been about 3 years, coming up on 3 years now that I've been clean off of all the drugs, this question that Luke has asked has come into my mind many times. You know, I feel really good about my sobriety today, and I think about it and I'm like, well, what if I'm in a pink cloud again? And I've asked myself, as Luke pointed out in the question, you know, what if it's just the consequences of this whole prison sentence that is keeping me from doing drugs and keeping me sort of in this artificial state where I think it's me that's keeping me sober, but it's really the consequences that are keeping me sober. There are a couple of points that come up when I reflect on the consequences thing. The first one is that regardless of how it may seem looking in from the outside, from my perspective now, it really feels like the consequences are much less than they were back then. Right now, I don't have really much to lose, honestly. Like I live in a little studio apartment, I work a dead-end job. If I started doing drugs and I peed dirty for them, realistically, what would probably happen is they would either give me a warning and start drug testing me more often and then make sure I got off of the drugs, or they could take me directly back to jail for like a period of time. And it would kind of prolong my sentence probably a little bit longer, maybe a little bit longer parole or something like that. Although that would suck and I wouldn't like that, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to me compared to before, when the consequences were losing my nursing license that I worked years for and it cost me tens of thousands of dollars, losing, you know, everything that my wife and I had accumulated, also just putting my wife through that, this person that I loved, like the consequences of just messing with her world, not to mention like the patients that I was putting at risk by being under the influence when I was a practicing nurse. All of that stuff is like way more serious to me than the situation that I'm in now is. The second thing with regard to consequences and the situation I'm in now is that I can actually get away with doing drugs right now, no problem. First of all, I rarely get drug tested. I've been on house arrest for 2 years and I've been drug tested 1 time. I live alone. I'm rarely checked up on. But also, as I've mentioned on this channel before, my favorite drug, Kratom, is available at the store easily right now, and they don't drug test for that stuff. And so I could take that all day, every day, and completely get away with it. And there would be no consequences as far as the law is concerned with that. So to address the question again, when I look at this situation, it really seems clear to me that the consequences of using are really not the reason that I'm not using. So what then is the reason that I'm not using? What it comes down to is this, at least for me. As I get older, I'm 37 now, I am starting to realize more and more that life is short, life is fleeting, and life is precious. At this point, I've spent the first half of my life, hopefully the first half, trying to find my well-being in satisfying cravings, satisfying fleeting desires, pacifying myself with fleeting pleasures. And I've taken that road all the way to its end, to where I was slamming heroin and meth, right? And before that, I was always kind of addicted to drugs. It was like a moment to moment trying to pacify myself or trying to satisfy myself with whatever it was, drugs, food, video games, my phone, whatever. And at this moment now, I've started to shift from, instead of focusing on like the consequences of me doing those things, I've shifted my attention to like, what am I missing out on in life because I'm doing those things? What am I going to miss out on in this precious life because I'm just, wasting my time or destroying my health, not taking care of myself? What highs am I missing out on? The real highs. What real, wholesome, organic experiences in this life am I missing out on? And I'm throwing it away for just satisfying the next craving that pops into my monkey mind. I want to know what it's like to encounter this life, to make contact with this life at my best, when I'm functioning as well as I can function, when I'm mentally healthy as I can possibly be. What does life look like when I'm really taking care of myself? So I've become interested in those things. And I've also recognized that before I ever started using drugs, I didn't feel well. I didn't feel mentally well. There were things in my psychology that were disturbing my experience of life. And that is precisely what made the drugs so attractive in the first place. And I've become interested now, from this new sober perspective, of figuring out what those issues were and addressing them in a real way so that I can move forward with wellness. You can think of addiction as a wound, right? You have a wound and it needs treatment, but you're just putting Band-Aids over it. And while the Band-Aids are kind of temporarily making it feel better, it's ultimately not healing the wound. And in fact, the wound maybe is even getting worse, and you're getting sicker because you're not really addressing this wound. You're just putting Band-Aids over it. And the drugs are like Band-Aids over the wound, except for the wound isn't a physical wound, it's a psychological wound, right? These psychological wounds that we carry from childhood into adulthood. Merely getting off of the drugs or getting away from your addictive behaviors, whatever your addictions are, ceasing to engage in those things merely because you're trying to avoid the consequences or merely trying to do it for other people in your life, as good as your intentions may be, when you're doing it for other people or you're doing it to avoid consequences, it's like removing those Band-Aids without addressing the wound. Okay, now you still have this wound, it still needs attention, but now you've just removed the Band-Aids, which were the only things that were kind of making it feel better, at least temporarily. And so now you're just like white knuckling it, right? Now this thing hurts, and you don't even have a Band-Aid for it anymore. But you're just gonna, you're just gonna do it, you're just gonna deal with it. Eventually, you're gonna cave, or you're going to either be miserable for a long time, or you're going to be like, okay, I need a Band-Aid, right? And maybe you put a different kind of Band-Aid on it this time. So like you could be addicted to one thing, and then you do this for long enough, and then you find something else that helps too. And so that's a different Band-Aid, but it's still just a Band-Aid. Now instead, if you get away from your addictions, right, you remove those Band-Aids, but then once you've kind of removed the Band-Aids and you're away from your addictions for a little while, you start to address, okay, how can I heal this thing? How can I just heal this thing so I can be healed and move forward? That's what getting off of drugs, like for yourself, looks like, as opposed to for other people or to avoid consequences. We all just want to be okay, right? And the reason that we find ourselves wrapped up in these problem addictions is because we just wanted to feel okay, and we found something that seemed to make us feel okay. But this was just a misguided attempt to make ourselves feel okay, because it ultimately doesn't work. And when we take those things away, we need to figure out why we didn't feel okay in the first place. And then we need to fix that so that we can start to feel more okay than we ever felt and start to become okay in real deeper ways. You know, we all just want the same things. We want happiness, we want contentment, we want peace, we want to be loved, we want to be accepted. And when we aren't finding those things in our lives, then we look for ways to pacify ourselves. But those of us who've gone through serious addiction have this advantage of realizing that the things that we do to pacify ourselves, these fleeting things that we do to pacify ourselves, are not the answer. They really aren't. You know, as I've come out of this, not only do I realize that heroin and meth aren't the answer, right? Or other drugs, alcohol, whatever, isn't the answer. I also realize that, you know, my phone, doom scrolling isn't the answer. I also realize that just binge watching Netflix isn't the answer. I also realize that eating a bunch of junk food isn't the answer, right? You know, I can still engage in some of those things at times, but like I realize that they really aren't the way out, right? And I've just become so much more interested in really getting out of that trap and really living as well as I can. That's where I'm at right now, okay? And actually, speaking of that, as I mentioned last week, I'm going on this 90-day commitment where I'm kind of flushing all that stuff out of my life. The reason I'm doing 90 days is because 90 days from like today, I think it's like 92 days actually, is the date that they might take the ankle monitor off. So I'm going to just commit to this next 90 days and I'm just going to kind of eliminate all of that stuff as much as I can. You know, I'm pretty good with it now, but I just want to really do a full detox and just find my wellness, you know, without all of those interruptions. And so this is a project that has kind of been ongoing, and this is my like new commitment to it right now. I'll speak more about the specifics of that elsewhere, and I'll kind of report some of my experience to you guys as I go along, of course. But the reason that I do these things and the reason I'm interested in these things is because I'm just like trying to tap into that real source of wellness, right? It's just I'm interested in it. I'm hungry for it, and I've experienced so much of it over the last almost 3 years since I've been off of all the substances, that I'm just not interested in going back to the way I was living before. I feel very blessed that I don't experience cravings. I don't struggle with desire to use ever, really. I don't know if that's going to be the case forever. You know, I'm not trying to tell the future here, but so far I can honestly say that I just don't have a desire to use anymore, because this other thing is so much more interesting. I hope that answers your question, Luke. All right, the song of the week this week was going to be another song from Becca, but we did a song from her last week, and right up until the last minute here, it was her song, so I'm going to move that one to next week. This week, I was actually hit with another one from my friend Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, for sending this to me. This is a YouTube video link that you're going to have to check out, so click it, it'll be in the description. And what it is saje, I think that's how you say it, featuring Jacob Collier. Jacob Collier is amazing if you're not familiar with him. And they are doing their own version of the song In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning. This thing is so cool. Like, it blew me away right away. You gotta check it out. It's so special. I can't even begin to describe it here. You just gotta check it out. Hope this video finds you all doing well. I hope each and every one of you are enjoying your moments, and I will see you on the next one. So thank you for watching.